Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Kenneth Bianchi. The Hillside Strangler, which was later found out to be a pair of cousins working together, were Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono Jr. The two were charged and convicted for harming and taking the lives of 10 separate women together, with Kenneth taking the lives of 2 others on his own. After an extremely intensive investigation and the arrest of the two, Kenneth began trying to set up an insanity defense. He claimed dissociative identity disorder. He blamed his alter ego Steve for the horrific multitude of crimes. Luckily, however, a court psychologist, Dr. Martin Orn, observed him and his behavior and found that his claims were untrue. After being presented with this finding, Kenneth agreed to plead guilty and testify against his cousin in exchange for leniency on his sentence. He still ended up being sentenced to life in prison, while his cousin got a sentence of life in prison without parole. While Angelo had a heart attack and passed in 2002, Kenneth still remains in prison. In our number 9 spot today, we have Warren Jeffs. Warren Jeffs is the president of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ and the Latter-day Saints, and is also serving a life plus 20-year sentence, which is exactly where he should be. His father was once the president of the cult, but when he passed, the position was passed on to Warren. As the new leader of the polygamous cult, he said that no one should even attempt to marry one of his father's widows, but just a few days later he himself married all of them except for 2, because one refused and then was banned from ever marrying anyone ever again, and the other ran away. If your marriage proposal causes someone to flee the cult that they're in, you're clearly not a very good person. Warren had the power to assign who would marry who, but he was also able to punish a man by taking his wives and children and assigning them to another man. As a man, you had to have at least 3 wives in order to get into heaven, they say, but the more wives, the more likely it would be that you got into heaven. In 2005, the Texas authorities conducted a raid and took legal custody of 416 children after someone called in and tipped them off about all of the horrible things that were happening at the ranch. In 2006, Warren was arrested for being the worst and is still serving his sentence. There is so much more to this case that we don't have time to cover, but there was a documentary released recently called Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey, which I would fully recommend if you want to know more about this horrible person. In our number 8 spot today, we have Tex Watson. Tex Watson was one of the central members of the Manson family, which was led by Charles Manson, and he was a willing participant for the horrible Tate and LaBianca crimes that took place on August 9th and 10th, 1969. If you don't know about them, you can look them up, but just a warning that the events that took place on those nights were horrible, gruesome, and insanely unnecessary. In October of 1969, Tex knew his arrest was coming, so he fled to his home state of Texas, but was later arrested and extradited back to California. Once he was in California, he refused to talk or eat and ended up losing 55 pounds, which got him sent to get tested to see if he was fit to stand trial, which he was. In 1971, he was convicted on 7 counts related to the killings that happened on those terrible nights. He originally received a death sentence, but it did end up being commuted to life in prison. But get this, you guys, he was able to release a book while in prison, and he got married, and through conjugal visits he was able to have 4 children. Thankfully, in 1996 they banned those kinds of visits for people serving life in prison, and in 2003 he did get divorced because his wife had met someone else, which, like, yeah, I would hope so. He also apparently is now a devout Christian, which is just interesting. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Golden State Killer. If you have any interest in true crime at all, you have most definitely heard of the Golden State Killer, as he was one of the most famous serial killers of all time, and he managed to elude police for 30 years. From 1973 to 1986, the GSK was responsible for taking the lives of 13 people, harming 50, and 120 different burglaries all across California. Throughout the investigation process, he used different tactics to both taunt and threaten police and victims, which is just on another level of messed up. If you don't know how this story ends, buckle up because it is absolutely wild. So you know those family DNA tests, like those 23andMe things where you send in your DNA and then they send you back your genealogy? Well, basically these services helped identify who the real GSK was. In 2018, when Detective Paul Holes, shout out to MFM if you know you know, and FBI lawyer Steve Kramer uploaded the GSK DNA profile that they were able to obtain from the crime scenes to the website GED Maps, match, they were able to find 10 to 20 people who had the same great-great-great-grandparents as the match. From there, a genealogist made a large family tree, and then they were able to single out 2 main suspects. After covertly connecting DNA samples from one of the suspects and comparing them to the crime scene DNA, they were finally able to arrest Joseph James DeAngelo, who is the Golden State Killer. After decades of waiting, the victims of his crimes were finally able to see justice served as he was sentenced to 12 life sentences plus 8 years. He was spared the death penalty because he admitted to numerous crimes he had perpetrated, some of which he wasn't even being charged for. He is now 75 years old and he will most certainly spend the rest of his life in prison. In our number 6 spot today we have James Holmes. James is the man behind the 2012 Aurora, Colorado shooting that took the lives of 12 people and injured 70 others in the Century 16 movie theater. Shortly after the crime spree, he was arrested and held without bail while he awaited trial on an accepted plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. I just want to make it clear in this case that insanity doesn't apply to every mental illness, of course. James was and is severely mentally ill, but the court has the job of deciding whether or not that illness made him unable to tell right from wrong. That's what the defense had to prove. Things were admitted to the court, such as his notebooks and journals, as well as testimony from 2 separate psychologists who spent 22 and 25 hours with him, and both diagnosed him with a serious mental illness, but both also stated that in their professional opinion, he knew right from wrong. After a really tumultuous trial, he ended up being found guilty. The jury could have given him a death sentence, but on account of his illness, they decided that that would be inappropriate, so in the end instead he was sentenced to 12 life sentences without parole and in an additional 3,318 years. In our number 5 spot today we have Charles Ng. Charles' story really starts off shortly after he moved to the United States on a student visa. He dropped out after his first semester and soon after he was involved in a hit-and-run accident. He then tried to avoid prosecution by enlisting in the United States Marine Corps using false documents that stated his birthplace was within the United States. He was later arrested by military police a year later for stealing automatic weapons, and then somehow he escaped custody, headed back toward Northern California, and this is where he met Leonard Lake, who is another real piece of work. Charles did end up going away and serving a bit of time, but it was only 18 months and he was back with Leonard, and that is when the two started their crime spree together. It is believed that together the pair took the lives of somewhere from 11 to 25 different people. When Leonard was caught and brought in for questioning, he sneakily took a cyanide pill he had hidden in his jacket and took his own life, but Charles ended up standing trial. He was convicted for 11 of the killings and he remains on death row at San Quentin. In our number 4 spot today we have Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. This is a double whammy because unfortunately both of these people are still alive, but at least one of them, Paul, is still in jail. This horrible pair are often referred to as the Ken and Barbie killers, and while Paul started off living a life of crime, he quickly brought Karla into it as well after their meeting. That is not to say she is not just as guilty as him, however, because they are both fully responsible for their own actions. While Paul was arrested for a multitude of crimes, the pair were arrested and convicted of taking the lives of 3 separate people, one of them being Karla's own sister. See what I mean about them both being responsible for their own crimes? They both suck. The investigation into the crimes proved to be quite difficult, with authorities having plenty of hoops to jump through, and this is why a plea deal was created for Karla. She had 1 week to accept or decline the deal, which would give her a sentence of 12 years for her full cooperation. She accepted. Both were convicted in 2005, and Paul was up to apply for parole in 2018, and in October of that year he was denied. His next parole hearing was just over a year ago on June 22nd of 2021, and it took only an hour of deliberation to decide to turn down that application as well. I personally think 30 seconds probably would have been enough to decide, but I'm just glad the outcome was the same. Karla, on the other hand, served her 12-year sentence and then was released. Like, years ago. She moved away from Canada and headed to Costa Rica for a while with her new husband and children, if you can believe that, but unfortunately she has since returned. In our number 3 spot today we have Edmund Kemper. Edmund Kemper is an American killer who is convicted for taking the lives of 10 people, including his paternal grandparents, as well as his own mother. It is said that he is noted for his height, as he is 6 foot 9 inches, and for his intelligence, as he apparently has an IQ of 145, but I personally think he is most notable for being an absolute monster. His first crime took place when he took the lives of his grandparents, and after this crime he was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and spent time in a hospital before it was determined that he was rehabilitated and he was released at the age of 21. After his release, he unfortunately went on a spree where he would target young females who were hitchhiking. After his final crimes, he ended up confessing and turning himself in, which is something we really don't see all of the time. When asked in an interview why he confessed, he said, quote, "The original purpose was gone. It wasn't serving any physical or real or emotional purpose. It was just a pure waste of time." 3 court-appointed psychiatrists examined and observed him and found him to be legally sane, and thus he was able to stand trial. On November 8, 1973, the jury deliberated for just 5 hours before returning with a verdict of guilty. He has been eligible for parole since 1979 and has been denied every time he applied, one time saying, quote, "Society is not ready in any shape or form for me. I can't fault them for that." He is eligible to apply for parole again next in 2024. In our number 2 spot today, we have Stephen Griffiths. This is a person who is said to have idolized the Yorkshire Ripper, so I'm sure what comes next will be no surprise. Stephen was a PhD student who wanted to achieve fame, but through the most sinister way possible. Between June 2009 and May of 2010, he would go on to take the lives of 3 separate women. His criminal history was also extremely concerning, as years ago he had been arrested due to an unprovoked attack on a grocery store manager, and it is said that he previously stated that he saw himself becoming a serial killer. Shortly after he was arrested for his crimes, CCTV footage emerged that shows him celebrating after taking the life of his final victim. The footage showed him holding up a crossbow and giving the finger directly to the camera. It is said that Stephen pled guilty to his crimes once caught, not because he was remorseful, but because he wanted to receive the recognition for them. In our number 1 spot today, we have Joanna Denny. This is a person responsible for a series of killings and attacks that took place in March 2013. Joanna is a very cold and heartless person and has, on many occasions, been said to laugh at her crimes and the lives she took, even still behind bars. After the first of her crimes, authorities launched a manhunt for her, and they used CCTV footage to help track her down. She was finally caught after attacking 2 dog walkers who, thanks to immediate medical intervention, were able to survive. There are many things about this story that make it exceptionally chilling, and it seems as though most people Joanna encounters are left with quite an impression of what a horrible person she is. On the day she was sentenced, it is reported that the judge, Mr. Justice Spencer, said, quote, "Although you pleaded guilty, you've made it clear you have no remorse." He went on to say, quote, "You are a cruel, calculating, selfish, and manipulative serial killer." After this, he sentenced her to a whole life order, or life in prison without parole, and it is said that she smiled and laughed at this. Since her time in prison, she is said to have planned escape attempts that involved the killing of a prison guard and other terrifying ideas. Starting off in our number 10 spot, we have Scott Lee Kimball. This is a man who took the lives of at least 4 people between the years of 2003 and 2004, but I say the words "at least" because although it's never been able to be proven, it is thought that he actually took the lives of somewhere around 20 plus people. During the first of his 2 crime-filled years, Scott actually worked as an FBI informant, but to none of our surprise now, he was one of the worst informants of all time. Not only did he rarely provide any sort of evidence that actually ended up being useful, but much of the evidence he provided ended up later being proven false. He was caught in 2006 not only for these horrific crimes, but many others as well, which included things like fraud and forgery. He ended up being sentenced to 70 years in prison, and he is still currently serving that sentence. In our number 9 spot today, we have Charles Cullen. This guy used to be a nurse who took the lives of his patients throughout his career, and he may be one of the worst serial killers ever recorded. He confessed to taking the lives of 40 people, but through subsequent interviews, it became apparent that the number was way higher than 40, he just couldn't remember the names of them all. But of course, he could remember the details of his crimes against them. His crimes started in 1988 and spanned over a decade into 2003. In October of 2003, when a patient at a hospital passed away from low blood sugar, the authorities were called. This person was Charles' final victim, and authorities began looking into him and investigating his past employment history. On December 12, 2003, authorities were arresting him and charging him with only one count of his crimes, but he just ended up admitting to 40. He ended up pleading guilty to his crimes and arranged a plea deal where authorities would not seek the death penalty if he cooperated. During one of his court proceedings, he continuously asked the judge to step down and apparently repeatedly chanted, "Your Honor, you need to step down," for 25 minutes, even after he was restrained and gagged for his outbursts. It is thought that his victims might be up in the 400 range, which is truly unbelievable. Charles was sentenced to 18 consecutive life sentences and will be eligible for parole in 2403, so let's hope he doesn't make it that long. In our number 8 spot today we have Hebert Mullen. Okay, I'm a true crime fan, and the more I learn, the more that being a person living in California in the 1970s seems like a terrifying experience. Like seriously, there were so many horrible, some of the worst serial killers who were active in the state at this time. I don't know how anyone got any sleep or did anything. Hebert is just one of the many who were active at this time. It is said that Hebert, before his crime spree, was quite bright and well liked. He was voted most likely to succeed in high school, but by his mid-30s, his life had taken a dark turn, and he was now a serial killer who would go on to take the lives of at least 13 people. To be perfectly honest, Hebert definitely had some mental illness struggles that greatly contributed to his horrific crimes that he committed. That does not excuse what he has done, but it would be completely unfair to not mention that part of the story. Experts have explained that Hebert suffers from paranoid schizophrenia, and he believed that his crimes were preventing earthquakes in California. He only believed this sort of fantasy more after his arrest because coincidentally, there were no earthquakes in California during his crime spree, but there was one shortly after his arrest. In 1973, he was sentenced to life in prison, and although he has been up for parole a number of times, he has been denied every single time, with the next hearing taking place in 2025. In our number 7 spot today we have Luis Garavito. Luis gained a nickname from the media of the Beast, and I think that's a great indication of the nature of his atrocious crimes. He is said to be one of the worst serial killers in the entire world, and it is believed that his victim count is up in the 300s range, which is absolutely shocking. He confessed to 147 crimes, and he was found guilty on 139 of those counts, which puts his sentence at 1,853 years, but here's the thing. This trial took place in Colombia, where he lives, and there is a law which puts the maximum sentence to 30 years. He was sentenced in 1999, meaning there's only a few years of this sentence left. He also had years taken off of his sentence because he assisted police in the search to recover some of the victims' bodies, which means that just next year, in 2023, he is eligible for parole. According to Luis himself, he committed these crimes because he had made a deal with the devil, and he explained that satanic ritual was involved in all of his crimes. In our number 6 spot today we have Randy Kraft. More commonly known as the Scorecard Killer, this monster is thought to have tormented and then taken the lives of 16 different young men from 1972 to 1983. Most of his crimes were committed in California, and he most often would pick up his victims as they were hitchhiking near military bases. The reason for his nickname is because of this strange and sinister list he had that had cryptic references to each of his victims. Based on this list, it is thought that he may have taken the lives of more than 50 people, which is beyond disturbing. When Randy was finally caught, he was pulled over by the police, who, when they went around to the passenger side, discovered the body of a 25-year-old Marine who would become Randy's final victim. Randy has been sitting on death row at San Quentin for over 25 years for these crimes, and despite his conviction and death sentence, and the gruesome discovery on the day he was caught, Randy still maintains his innocent plea. Something's telling me he just might be lying. In our number 5 spot today we have Dennis Rader. The BTK, whose real name is Dennis Rader, was one of the worst serial killers from 1974 to 1991. He left taunting letters for police and newspapers where he described his crimes, but thankfully, this annoyingly large and misplaced ego is what led to his demise. After a 10-year hiatus on his disgusting crimes, he couldn't keep his mouth shut, so he began communicating with the media again in 2004. This communication, combined with his lack of knowledge on how technology works, led to his arrest in 2005. During his trial, he didn't apologize for his crimes, but he did describe them in full detail, which is horrifying and extremely eerie. I could not even imagine having to be there during that. After his trial, he ended up being sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences with a minimum of 175 years. When Rader was first arrested, when the police were taking him to the station, an officer asked him, "Mr. Rader, do you know why you're going downtown?" To which he replied, "Oh, I have some suspicions why." In our number 4 spot today we have Gary Ridgway. This horrible human being is also sometimes known as the Green River Killer, and his crimes took place somewhere between 1982 to potentially as recent as 2001. He was convicted for 49 crimes but confessed to an unbelievable 71, which makes him the second most prolific serial killer in the United States in terms of confirmed killings. Most of his victims were either sex workers or women in vulnerable circumstances, and through DNA profiling evidence in 2001, authorities were able to connect him to 4 of his crimes. From there, they made a deal with him where they would spare him the death sentence in exchange for the disclosure of the location of all of the missing women. Gary took the deal and was spared the death sentence, and instead was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Not only did he say that he chose the type of victims he did because they were quote easy to pick up, and that he quote hated most of them, but he also called his crimes his career. So do with that what you will. In our number 3 spot today we have Rose West. Rose West is an English serial killer who committed her crimes alongside her husband. He definitely also would make a spot on this list, but he decided to take his own life in 1995 after being arrested while awaiting trial. Really strong stand-up man. The terrible pair were investigated and subsequently arrested for taking 9 lives together, with Rose receiving an additional charge for another 10th life. During the court proceedings, against the advice of her counsel, Rose decided that she would testify herself, and what a trip that was. During her testimony, she sometimes was very tearful and dramatic, but of course, an act like that can be hard to keep up, so other times she was just cracking jokes and laughing. Imagine doing your tight 5 while you're on trial for the worst of the worst crimes. Luckily, it seems as though the jury hated that as much as I do, because they came back with a unanimous verdict of guilty on all 10 crimes. Get this, in prison, Rose West met Myra Hindley, which if you don't know who that is, she committed a bunch of very similar crimes with her husband, boyfriend, partner, whatever as well, and the two became besties, and they even had an affair throughout the whole thing. Rose is still trying to say that she was totally innocent and that Fred was completely responsible for all of the crimes. Also, to make this story even crazier, for those of you who watched part 1 of this series, the number 1 spot on the last one, her name was Joanna Denny. Well, Joanna was in the same prison as Rose, and in 2019 she threatened to kill her. Because of this, they had to move Rose secretly to another location because there was a very real threat to her life. In our number 2 spot today we have Ted Kaczynski. Ted Kaczynski is most often referred to as the Unabomber due to the atrocious crimes that he committed. He was known for being quite bright from a young age, and it is believed that he had an IQ of about 167. He was accepted into Harvard at the age of just 16, and he went on to receive a PhD. At 25, things were still looking bright for the guy as he landed himself a job as an assistant professor at the University of California, Berkeley, but just 2 years later he resigned from that position, and his life took quite a drastic and dark turn. In 1971, it is said that Ted moved to a remote cabin in Montana that had no electricity or running water. From 1971 until 1977, Ted learned to live a hermit, off-the-grid lifestyle while learning different survival skills, but once 1978 rolled around, he was ready to start his terror campaign. From here until 1995, he began a nationwide bombing against people who were involved with modern technology. He planted these weapons or would mail them, and in the end took the lives of 3 people and severely injured 23. Just like many of these kinds of people, his own ego and delusions got in the way, because on April 24th, 1995, he sent an anonymous handwritten letter that was addressed to the police via the New York Times. His own brother ended up recognizing his handwriting, however, and that's the tip that he gave to the FBI. Ted was then captured, tried, and sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. In our number 1 spot today we have Christopher Scarver. Okay, Christopher is a little different than the others on this list, and if you're unfamiliar with his story, you'll soon find out why. Basically, on June 1st, 1990, Christopher showed up at the Wisconsin Conservation Corps Training Program office, and there he demanded money from the man he found. When the man only gave him $15, Christopher went on to shoot him. Christopher then went and demanded money from another man and continued to shoot the man he had already shot until this second man gave him money. Christopher was caught and convicted for this horrible crime, but the story does not end here. On November 28, 1994, Christopher was assigned work detail with 2 other inmates. One was Jesse Anderson, who had taken the life of his own wife, and the other was none other than prolific serial killer and monster himself, Jeffrey Dahmer. Well, when the 3 were left alone, Christopher took a bar from a piece of equipment in the exercise room and used that to basically beat and kill the other 2. I'm not gonna lie, there's no excuse and no reason for any of the crimes these people committed, including these ones, but there is a very weird sort of poetic justice to that. Christopher was tried again for these 2 crimes and received 2 more life sentences. Apparently in 2012 it was announced that he wants to write a tell-all book about the killing of Dahmer, which is definitely bizarre, but we'll see if that ever comes to fruition, I guess. Starting off our list, in our number 10 spot we have Vicki Dawn Jackson. Vicki was a woman who worked as a nurse for a number of years. She first got her nursing license in 1989, but it wasn't until the 2000s when things took a seriously dark turn. Between December of 2000 and February of 2001, the hospital that Vicki was working for recorded a number of deaths that was unusual. It was a higher amount. Most of these patients were in the age range of 60 to 100 years old, and of course people just chalked this up to the advanced age of most of these patients, but a rumor began to spread that someone just might be responsible. After this, the hospital's administrator noticed that a vial of a drug called Mevacron had gone missing. You might see where I'm going with this. As it turns out, the person responsible was Nurse Vicki, and she had at least 10 patients whose lives she took by giving them too much of this missing drug. It was a muscle relaxant. Take in that this is 10 people between December and February. That is an unbelievable amount of people in a remarkably short amount of time. You might be wondering why she took these lives, and apparently she did it when she found these people rude, or quote, too demanding. In our number 9 spot today we have Daniel Perez. Also known as Lou Castro, Daniel led a cult that was located on a 20-acre property in a rural area just north of Wichita. He convinced his followers that he had magical powers, and he told them all that he was a centuries-old angel who needed to commit some horrific crimes in order to stay alive. These crimes would have certainly been more than enough to throw him on this list, but he of course couldn't just stop at committing one type of crime. He had to make sure he really stole the show on just being the worst. Basically, he had the really clever idea to use his followers' life insurance policies to live a lavish lifestyle, like as if no one would think that's weird or suspicious. While some of these life insurance policies were collected through regular means, of course that kind of greed only leads to evil things, which of course means that he ended up taking one of his followers' lives so that he could collect the cash. It is thought that he also contributed to the deaths of some of the other people's life insurance policies he cashed in on, but unfortunately there was never any evidence that would be able to substantiate that claim. Despite this, however, on April 21st, 2010, authorities were able to arrest Daniel, and he was charged with 28 felonies. In February of 2015, he was convicted on all counts and received a sentence of 80 years in jail, where he remains. In our number 8 spot today we have Chester Turner. Chester is an American serial killer who, on April 30th, 2007, was convicted of taking the lives of 11 women in the Los Angeles area, and on June 19th, 2014, he was convicted of 4 more that they were able to tie back to him. He has been referred to by prosecutors as one of the most prolific serial killers in the city's history, and if you know Los Angeles' history, that says a lot. In his original trial that led to his conviction, Chester was sentenced to death, but at the following one in 2014, he also received an additional death sentence. In the end, like with a lot of these kinds of stories, DNA came to save the day and help authorities find out who was committing these horrible, horrible crimes. In our number 7 spot today we have Michael Bear Carson and Susan Carson. This couple is not one that anyone would want to encounter. The stories of these two come from the 80s. They were married, and on the outside they appeared like just a couple of harmless hippies. We all know not to judge a book by its cover though. In the end, they would go on to become known as the San Francisco Witch Killers. Didn't know San Francisco had so many witches running around. Basically, together the pair took the lives of 3 separate people between 1981 and 1983. They started off by killing their roommate, who Susan claimed was a witch, and said that she was stealing her quote health, power, and beauty. They next killed one guy that they worked on a farm with because they said he was a demon, and the final person they took the life of unfortunately picked up the pair as they were hitchhiking, and they took his life because they claimed that he was a quote black witch, whatever that means. Essentially, they were just committing crimes against people that they claimed to be witches. The pair were each tried and convicted for each separate crime and are both serving sentences of 75 years to life, and of course neither of them have shown any kind of remorse for what they've done. In our number 6 spot today we have Samuel Dietman. Samuel is just one half of the pair known as the serial shooters. He, along with a man named Dale, were actively committing these crimes between May of 2005 and August of 2006, and basically they were arsonists who would randomly set fire to objects, but they would also drive around and commit random acts of violence, taking people's lives. In the end, a series of tips is what led investigators to identify the perpetrators of these horrible crimes, in particular one from a friend of Samuel who explained that Sam had actually confessed to some of the killings one night while drinking. In Dale's trial, he was sentenced to death 6 times, and his brother, who was later found out to have assisted in some of the crimes, was sentenced to 25 years. Samuel was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dale ended up taking his own life while on death row, which is why this point mainly focuses on Samuel, who remains in prison. In our number 5 spot today we have Keith Hunter Jesperson, also known as the Happy Face Killer. After the body of his first victim was found, Keith had someone else actually claim to be responsible for his crime. You would think that this would have been his ideal scenario, but that was not the case. He wanted to be known for his crimes. So, to help himself get media attention, he drew a smiley face on a bathroom wall hundreds of miles away from his crime scene, and here he left an anonymous letter where he confessed to the crime and provided proof. He didn't end up receiving a reply, so he decided to write more letters to the media and to the authorities, each signed with a smiley face. In the end, Keith was initially caught after he became the prime suspect in the death of his girlfriend at the time. Previously, his victims had been people that he had no connection to, so this was truly the mistake the authorities needed to catch him. Keith then admitted to his crimes, and while he has formally been linked to 8 deaths, he has confessed to somewhere around 185. Keith was tried and sentenced to life without parole for his heinous crimes, and he remains in prison at Oregon State Penitentiary. In our number 4 spot today we have Quincy Allen. Quincy Allen is a man who went on a crime spree between July and August of 2002, where he took the lives of 4 people. His crime spree was actually inspired while he was in prison serving time for stealing a vehicle. It was here that a fellow inmate decided to start recruiting others and told him that he could get him a job as a mafia hitman, and this is all that Quincy needed to be inspired. As soon as he was out of prison, he began practicing for his new, upcoming career. Quincy started off his horrific crime spree on July 7th, 2002 by attacking a 51-year-old homeless man who was sleeping at the time. Luckily, this man was able to survive this attack. His crimes continued until he was arrested on August 14th, 2002. After his arrest and trial, Quincy received a sentence of death and is still on death row awaiting execution. His sentencing did not deter him from the criminal life, however, as in 2009, Quincy, along with another inmate, planned an attack on a correctional officer at the prison they both reside at. In the end, the guards had to use rubber bullets to subdue the pair. Quincy was intended to be executed on January 8th, 2010, but there was a stay of execution that was accepted, and as of July 26, 2022, Quincy's death sentence was overturned. In our number 3 spot today we have David Berkowitz. David Berkowitz, or the Son of Sam, is an American serial killer who terrorized New York from July of 1976 to July of 1977. He took the lives of 6 people and wounded 7 others, all while eluding the biggest manhunt in New York City history. He was one of those really arrogant ones who leaves the little notes for police promising to do it again, kind of like taunting them. Well, his arrogant self was caught for his crimes, and he was arrested on August 10th, 1977, and he was indicted. He confessed to all of his crimes and claimed that he was just obeying the orders of a demon that had manifested itself in the form of a dog that belonged to his neighbor. Okay, Sure. He was found mentally competent to stand trial, and he pleaded guilty to his crimes, which left him sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. He later admitted to making up the dog story, which we know, but he did say that instead he was a member of a violent satanic cult and his crimes were committed as a part of that. These claims were investigated, but no one has ever been able to confirm or deny these claims. In our number 2 spot today we have Sean Great. Sean is a serial killer who committed a series of crimes from 2006 until he was apprehended in 2016. Throughout his decade of criminal activity, it is thought that he took the lives of at least 5 people. In September 2016, Sean was arrested and later indicted for 2 killings as well as kidnapping and harming a woman whose 911 call actually led to his arrest. At the same time, in another county next door, he was also being charged with 2 other deaths as well as another one from all the way back in 2006. This final count from all of those years ago was actually an unsolved Jane Doe case who had been unidentified for 12 years. When Sean confessed to this crime, he wasn't even sure who she was, he just said that he believed her name was Dana. On May 7th, 2018, Sean was convicted on 2 of the counts, and on March 1st, 2019, he pleaded guilty to 2 of the others, and on September 11th, 2019, he pleaded guilty to an additional count. In the end, he was sentenced to death and has remained on death row since that final plea and sentencing, and he is currently scheduled to be executed in 2025. In a very bittersweet turn of events, in June of 2019, that Jane Doe victim was finally able to be identified through the DNA Doe Project, and she was identified as 23-year-old Dana Nicole Lowry from Minden, Louisiana. It definitely can't bring her back, but there is a lot of comfort in knowing that her family finally received some answers. In our number 1 spot today, we have Glenn Stewart Godwin. In 1980, Glenn was working in California and wasn't really living a life of crime, so it's pretty surprising that in this year, he and his roommate decided to make a plan to rob someone they knew who was once a friend of theirs. Of course, things go awry and it turns into a botched robbery, and Glenn ends up taking the life of the person they were robbing. They then tried to blow up the crime scene to get rid of any evidence, but of course that didn't work and also just made them look even more insane. Both Glenn and his roommate were both tried and convicted for the crimes in 1983. This is not where the story ends. In 1987, Glenn tried to escape prison and failed, and this landed him at a higher security prison. At this new prison, he attempted escape again, and this time, he was actually successful. He fled to Mexico, where he tried, unsuccessfully, to be a part of the illegal drug trade. He was arrested again and sentenced in Mexico, and this is when American authorities began the process of getting him extradited. During this process, Glenn decided that it would be a brilliant idea to take the life of an inmate who was a member of the Mexican cartel, which very obviously slowed the process of extradition. This gave him time to plan another escape, which he did in 1991. And since then, he's been on the run.
And we're obviously going to start at number 10 now with Alexis Flores. This guy is a fugitive from Honduras who was added to the FBI's most wanted list on June 2nd, 2007. He's wanted for the kidnapping, rape and murder of 5-year-old Iriana De Jesus. It happened in Philadelphia in 2000. Flores had been living as a homeless drifter under the fake name of Carlos. He was given work as a handyman in a local park. The park gave him shelter and clothing as well. On August 3rd of that year, 5 days after 5-year-old Iriana De Jesus had been reported missing, she was found dead in that very same basement that Flores had been given as his shelter. Police questioned the actual owner of the basement who told them about Flores. When they went to go and find him though, he was missing. Ever since then, he's been on the run. Amazingly, police in Arizona actually arrested him in 2002 for possession of forged documents. They never made the link to the previous case though, and instead deported him to Honduras. In 2006, his DNA sample from Arizona was positively matched to the crime scene in Philadelphia. The following year, he was then added to the FBI's most wanted list. He is considered armed and dangerous and could be in Honduras or even back in the US.
The youngest guy currently on the FBI top 10 list, we have Alejandro Roselos Castelo at number 9. He is an American criminal that is only 17 years old, and he killed a 23-year-old woman. That woman was someone Alejandro dated. This teenager is very dangerous.
The FBI is offering a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading directly to the arrest of alleged murderer Alejandro Castillo. The 18-year-old is the latest addition to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list.
The murder took place in Charlotte, North Carolina back in 2016, and ever since then, the police and the FBI are unable to track this kid down. Number 8, do you guys remember Kony 2012? Well, Joseph Kony is known as the leader leader of the Lord's Resistance Army that is responsible for abducting as many as 2 million people. Is this real life right now? Kony also forced some of these children to kill their own parents. Well, the war against Kony started in 2012. $800 million was spent to try to track this man down, but over the years, there was no successful to kill or capture this man. There was a YouTube video talking in detail about who Kony was and the massive problem happening in our society because of this man. The video was titled Kony 2012 and it currently has over 100 million views.
If they knew, Kony would have been stopped long ago.
Let the world, let the international community take justice to him there. Follow him wherever he is. First, to rescue our children. And secondly, to deliver the justice.
We are determined to cooperate with any friend of Uganda to ensure that this mindless killing and slaughter is ended.
Alright, moving on to number 7 now, we have Jason Derek Brown. This fugitive from LA has been on the FBI's most wanted list since July 2007 for a first-degree murder and armed robbery that occurred 3 years prior. In 2004, Robert Keith Palomares, a 24-year-old armored truck guard, was carrying the weekend deposits outside a theater in Phoenix. At 10 a.m., Brown ambushed him with a gun, shooting him in the head 5 times. Brown then took a bag containing $56,000 in cash and fled down an alley on a bicycle. Palomares was transported to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. Within a week, police had issued an arrest warrant for Brown. He fled to Nevada, then California, then Oregon before disappearing completely off the grid. Police have 200 leads about where he might be, although they often conflict with each other. He could be in the US, Canada, or even France or Thailand. The FBI is now offering up to $200,000 for information leading to his capture. Next up on number 6 now, we have Yasser Abdel Said. This Egyptian man is a US resident wanted for the 2008 murder of his own teenage daughters, Amina and Sarah. He was an abusive and controlling father who stalked their every move, watching to see if they dishonored the family somehow. When he suspected that one of his daughters, Amina, was in a relationship, he moved the entire family to a new home. The 2 girls and their mother ended up fleeing from Yasser after Christmas 2007. Eventually though, their mother convinced them that they should return back home to him. On January 1st, 2008, he greeted them with a kiss and took them out in his taxi, telling them he wanted to have dinner with them. He then pulled over and shot both girls to death in the back of his taxi cab. Amina died instantly, while Sarah managed to call the police before she also succumbed to her injuries. Yasser vanished. The FBI thinks he may be driving a cab in New York. On December 4th, 2014, he was added to the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitive list with a $100,000 reward for any information leading to his arrest. Moving on to number 5 now, we have Dawood Ibrahim. Meet the most wanted man in India. Ibrahim is the head of a 5,000 strong organized crime network called the D Company. Now they're responsible for everything from drug trafficking to contract killings in countries such as India, Pakistan and the United Arab Emirates. Ibrahim is personally wanted on charges of murder, extortion, targeted killing, drug trafficking and terrorism, to name but a few. In 2003, he was designated as a global terrorist with head money of $25 million US. According to Washington, it's thought he uses the same smuggling routes as Al-Qaeda and has worked with them on multiple occasions. He's thought to have been involved with them in the November 2008 Mumbai attacks, bombings which killed 257 people and wounded 713 more. It's thought that he's also linked to the Bollywood film industry. There have been multiple reports of him financing movies, but also threatening producers to get what he wants.
Alright, moving on to number 4 now, we have John Patrick Hannan, who is actually known as the world's most successful prison fugitive who has been on the run for the past 60 years. That's a 6-0. John Hannan was just 22 years old when he was arrested and put into jail. He was sentenced for 21 months behind bars for stealing a car and assaulting 2 police officers, but he was able to break out of the facility just 30 days after. This guy is either a super genius or just a big dum-dum. I say super genius because he was able to be in the run for the past 60 years. And I say he's a big dum-dum because who escapes from prison when you only have to serve a 21-month sentence? Good behavior might even have gotten him out earlier, who knows?
Next up, number 3 now, we have Semyon Mogolovich. This Ukrainian-born man is a Russian mafia boss, or rather, he is the boss of bosses. He is at the helm of most Russian mafia syndicates in the world. His vast empire has resulted in the FBI referring to him as the most dangerous mobster in the world. Mogolovich is involved in weapons trafficking, contract murders, extortion, drug trafficking and prostitution on an international scale. He hasn't lived a very secretive life either, and his homes and private life are all there to see on his Wikipedia page. The problem for international law enforcement is how well connected and protected he is. In 2006, former Russian Secret Service member Alexander Litvinenko alleged that Mogolovich had a good relationship with a Russian president known as Vladimir Putin. Litvinenko was assassinated via radiation poisoning not long after that allegation. He used to be on the FBI's top 10 most wanted list, but was removed back in 2015. This is because the USA and Russia doesn't actually have an extradition treaty, meaning Russia is not obliged to hand him over to the US if they do catch him, basically making him untouchable. Next up at number 2 now, we have Shane O'Brien. He's a suspected killer who has been on the run for 2 years from UK police. He's now on Interpol's worldwide most wanted list. The 30-year-old is alleged to have murdered 21-year-old Josh Hanson in an unprovoked knife attack in a bar in West London in 2015. According to witnesses, O'Brien removed an item from his coat pocket and plunged it into Josh's neck. He was pronounced dead at the scene. A £50,000 reward is now being offered for any information leading to his prosecution. He's described as white, 6 feet tall, with grey eyes, dark brown hair, a full beard, and a tattoo on his back of an owl holding a skull.
And finally, at number 1, we have Robert William Fisher, who appears on the FBI most wanted list. If you find this man and catch him, you will be rewarded at least $100,000, which is why people actually make it their career finding these type of people who have bounties on their heads. Getting back to Robert William, he is wanted for the 2001 murder of his wife Mary and their 2 children. Robert Fisher then blew up his residential home in Scottsdale, Arizona. Investigators believe he murdered his family because he felt threatened by his wife's intent to divorce.
Justice for a Scottsdale mom and her 2 kids after they were horrifically killed. Now, 15 years later, the images of that crime continue to capture the nation's attention.
It's been about 17 years and still the FBI doesn't know his whereabouts. The question is, how smart is this guy to be able to live another life for all these years? Robert is also currently the longest lasting person currently on the FBI most wanted list. So think about that. The FBI most wanted list, they put a lot of resources into finding that person, but yet they just can't find this guy.
Coming in at number 10, the Eastbound Strangler. Back in 2006, one fateful night, this monster took the life of 4 women and was never seen from again. The Eastbound Strangler targeted 4 New Jersey escorts and left them behind the Golden Key Motel, face down, in a row, facing east and about 60 feet apart from each other. The victims were left fully clothed, minus having their socks and shoes removed, and all appeared to have been killed in the same way. Early on, there was speculation that it could have been linked to the Long Island killer, another unknown attacker, but it was later ruled out by investigators. Despite 15 years of investigation, they have never been able to come close to any leads, and whoever was responsible has never been caught, and the $25,000 reward remains unclaimed. Next up at number 9, the Texas Killing Field. Now, what would seem like a normal 25-acre patch of land just off the highway near Houston, Texas, is actually a haunting field where more than 30 bodies have been found since the early 1970s. Nearly all of the victims found have been young women and girls, and there are apparently many more missing women from the area, but no remains beyond the 30 victims have ever been recovered. Despite the authorities' best effort, it is unknown how many perpetrators have actually contributed to this field, though it's suspected that more than one person is responsible. To date, only 3 of the cases have been successful in convicting an attacker, and the remaining 27 remain unsolved, with no leads and no luck of where to turn next. In 2011, a film entitled Texas Killing Fields was made about the series of crimes associated with the notorious plot of land, but it was not received well, and unfortunately did not kickstart anything more than upset families of the victims and a few false confessions to the atrocities. Coming in at number 8, the Flat Tire Murderer. Active Active between 1975 to 1976, this monster is believed to have been responsible for between 12 to 35 deaths, though the exact number is still unknown. The perpetrator got his name as allegedly he would offer to help women traveling alone who had gotten a flat tire, but unbeknownst to them, it was the attacker who had deflated their tires in the first place. While not all victims followed this exact formula, it was certainly the method for the first of his 2 victims. Bodies of the victims were found dumped into canals, while their cars were found abandoned miles away. Authorities believe the cause of their deaths to have been from drowning, and were all found with signs of being taken advantage of prior to their death. Over the years, with no culprits being found for these vicious attacks, some have suggested it could have been the work of notorious Ted Bundy, but that's merely speculation and has no evidence to back it up. For all we know, the flat tire murderer remains on the loose. Coming in at number 7, the Honolulu Strangler. Credited with being responsible for the death of 5 women, this unidentified killer was active only between 1985 to 1986 and was never caught. The sadistic perpetrator was known to target women, but that seems to be where the links stop. All of his victims were brutally attacked and taken advantage of, and then left tied up on the street to be found by police. Authorities took this case very seriously, as at the time it was the first known repeat criminal of his kind in Honolulu. Local authorities put together a 27-person task force, but even with all that manpower, they were never able to find the attacker. There was hope when a man named Howard Gay was arrested, as he seemed to fit the profile, but he was eventually released after further interrogation. Years later, in 2017, the case was covered by a true crime podcast, and once again in 2022, but despite its popularity, we have no idea what happened to the Honolulu Strangler. Next up at number 6, the West Mesa Bone Collector. Back in 2009, a woman on a leisurely walk with her dog came across something peculiar, a human bone. Little did she know, she'd actually stumbled upon a major crime scene. Upon her discovery, authorities became immediately involved and discovered that it was a mass grave filled with human remains. Nicknamed the West Mesa Bone Collector, this killer was active between 2001 and 2005 and was a truly sick man. He was known to target young women, usually Hispanic, and almost always involved in late night services or with connections to the drug trade, but not exclusively, making it hard to identify just why he chose the victims he did. The thing is, during 2001 to 2005, there were reportedly more missing persons than usual, but I guess the New Mexico police didn't feel much need to dive into the disappearance of women involved in this type of work. While we know practically nothing about the killer, we do know that he is responsible for the deaths and that he would take the bodies to the desert to dispose of them. After years of police investigation, the remains of 11 women were found scattered in the deserts of Albuquerque, but the exact way they died is yet to be discovered, as medical examiners and forensic experts have not been able to identify his methods, which is very unusual. Police and FBI have never been able to track down who is responsible for ending these young women's lives, and the monster remains on the loose. Coming in at number 5, the Frankfurt Slasher. Between 1985 and 1990, this monster preyed upon women in a rough neighborhood in Philadelphia. The Frankfurt Slasher was known for being incredibly violent, mutilating the victims' bodies past recognition. What was designed to be on the inside of the body, like organs and muscle tissue, would often end up exposed, and then after having his way with the victims, he would leave them on the street, strategically posed for when the police would find them. Believed to be responsible for the death of 9 women, the Frankfurt Slasher targeted specifically white women, usually ladies of the night, with a public history of mental illness. But oddly, the ages of the victims ranged from 28 all the way to 68. One man, Leonard Christopher, was convicted of one of the crimes in 1990, but more happened once he was put away, causing concern that maybe they'd found the wrong man. Further, significant questions have popped up regarding the quality of evidence they used to convict Christopher, Christopher. He apparently did not match witness reports of the white man seen with other victims, leaving many in fear that the Frankfurt slasher remains uncaught and unidentified. Next up at number 4, the Chicago Strangler. Between 2001 to 2018, a reported 75 Chicago women all lost their lives the same way, suffocation. But it wasn't until 2019 that a task force was made to try and stop these killings from happening. Originally, authorities denied that there was any link of the crimes and denied it all being one person committing them, hence the delay in gathering a task force. But after an article from the Chicago Tribune ran in 2018, they were forced to admit that it was in fact a distinct possibility. As was uncovered in the 2018 article, there was in fact a few distinct links between the crimes. All the victims were women, all the victims were killed the same way, and nearly all the victims were black. Coincidence or not, the optics were very bad, as it seemed the authorities were not taking the death of black women seriously, and the task force was created. Then in 2021, a docu-series on Discovery Plus began streaming, and though activists were demanding answers from the Chicago Police Department, they still maintained they could neither confirm nor deny if the killings were from a repeat convict. We still have no clue who killed these women, and they still remain out in the world walking free. Next up at number 3, the I-70 killer. You wouldn't think the shopping mall off the highway would be a dangerous place to be or get a job, but in the spring of 1992, it very well could have been. 30 years ago, along the Interstate 70, or I-70, an unidentified man was responsible for the death of 6 store clerks who all had the same thing in common. They all worked in a shop off the same highway, they were all brunettes with long hair, and they were mostly all women. Except for one man, but he too had long hair and wore a ponytail, and police suspected the killer mistook him for a woman from behind. The attacker oddly didn't seem too interested in anything but taking their lives, as he rarely robbed the stores after, and if he did, he would maybe take $100. After one of the attacks, a customer actually walked in the store and caught him, the 2 victims on the floor, and the attacker still with the weapon in his hand. But fearing for his life, he ran away as fast as he could, and in shock, didn't call the authorities until nearly an hour later, well after the man had escaped the scene. A few years later, in 1994 Texas, 2 similar attacks took place, and then again in 2001 Indiana. The cases have been featured on America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and Dark Minds, but the man has never been caught and remains walking among us to this day. Coming in at number 2, Hercules. While some say killer, others say vigilante. This perpetrator separates themselves from the rest. The distinction between Hercules and, say, the Frankfurt slasher? Well, Hercules only attacks those who have already committed a brutal crime. Or rather, one very specific brutal crime, taking advantage of women. In 2019, 3 men were found in Bangladesh, each shot and each with a note tied around their neck. While not identical, all the notes followed the same structure. First stating the name of the victim whose neck the note was wrapped around, followed by the name of the victim who they had attacked. It would then explain that this was the fate of those who committed this crime and that others should beware. Signed, Hercules. Law enforcement has yet to uncover who is responsible for these deaths, but have no clue if the killings are by one person or a group of people. It sure has sparked debate, with many questioning who the real bad guy is here. And last up today at number 1, Pedro Lopez. Nicknamed the Monster of Andes, Pedro Lopez might be one of the most notorious criminals alive. After being kicked out of his childhood home at just 8 years old for taking advantage of his younger sister, Lopez was evicted and sent to live the rest of his childhood on the streets of Colombia. According to Lopez, not long after he was thrown out, he was abducted and assaulted, and then by 13 was taken in by a family, but after 2 years ran away. By 1978, Lopez claims to have been responsible for the death of 100. That same year, an indigenous tribe caught him and was going to execute him, but a nearby missionary took pity on him and demanded they release him and call him into the authorities. The police, however, for whatever reason, promptly released him from custody. From there, he fled to Colombia once again, followed by Ecuador, where he reports to have attacked about 3 girls a week, and when he was caught and arrested in 1980, he confessed to killing 200 100 victims, but there's suspicion that it could have been worse, as many as 360. Though he did remain jailed for 14 years, in 1994 he was released from prison for good behavior and sent back to Colombia to serve the rest of his sentence in a psychiatric facility. But only 4 years later, in 1998, he was ruled legally sane and released on a $50 bail. Rather predictably, he fled the country after his release, and a warrant for his arrest was promptly released. His whereabouts remain a mystery, and no one knows if he has committed any more attacks since he vanished.
Number 10. Jason Brian Dalton. Some people think that demons and possession usually happens at a crossroads or maybe even with a Ouija board, but this is the 21st century. Jason Brian Dalton blamed it on his phone. He was an Uber driver, and on the evening of February 20th, he used a weapon to take the lives of multiple people. Dalton said that when he opened up the Uber app, he was presented with the symbol of the Eastern Star, which represents God on Earth. But apparently it wasn't God communicating with him through the phone, as he says that an image of the devil's head appeared on his screen, which he describes as looking like a cow with horns. He said that from that night he could barely remember anything, except that the devil would apparently tell him where to go and whose lives to take, saying that it was like the devil completely took over his body and mind. Then when police apprehended him, he said that the screen on his phone went from black to red, and that the devil was no longer in control after that point. Number 9. Arnie Johnson. It's impossible to go through any discussion about this topic without talking about this one specific case, and I'm sure you were all expecting to hear it, so let's get it out of the way. In 1981, a man named Arnie Johnson killed his landlord, and the events went on to inspire the movie The Conjuring: The Devil Made Me Do It. Before the night of the crime, Arnie's fiance's brother appeared to become possessed by the devil, speaking in strange languages and his eyes turning black, among other things. As time went on, Arnie would start taunting the demon, telling him to leave the brother alone and take him instead. He then went to investigate a spooky well and supposedly saw a demon, who took over his body and committed the crime. When he went on trial, his team pleaded not guilty by reason of demonic possession. A pretty bold move. Of course, the judge didn't accept this, and Arnie was sentenced, only ending up serving about 5 years before he was released and married his fiancée. Number 8. Pazuzu Algarad. In North Carolina, a man going by the name of Pazuzu Algarad was arrested after it was discovered he had been burying bodies of his victims. He had taken on the name Pazuzu in reference to the demon from The Exorcist, and had even undergone some strange body modification, making his tongue forked and sharpening his teeth. If that's already not weird enough for you, the man who was at the property when the bodies were discovered had a lot to say about Algarad. He said that the man was possessed by demons and that they would take over his body about once a month, usually around a full moon. He described it as being very serpentine and said that the man's eyes would get glazy, saying it was like the inner part of the man would fade away. And he also said that Algarad would sacrifice animals once a month. The interior of the home was also terrifying, as the walls were apparently covered in graffiti and dark symbols, and the building was deemed unsafe for human life. Number 7. Pamela Furnett. In Norfolk, Virginia, 2 police officers were called to the scene after receiving reports of a man screaming and yelling in the street, and it didn't end when they got there. The man apparently swore at the police and assaulted them, even biting one of the officers on the hand. Pretty strange, but I'm sure we've all bitten someone at some point, right? Well, it gets just a little bit weirder. A woman named Pamela Furnett is apparently the wife of the man who had attacked the officers, and had apparently been begging them not to hurt him despite his actions. She said that her husband hadn't been in his right mind because he had been possessed by a demon. Pamela said that she had even managed to catch the demon on camera and knew that it had possessed her husband, saying, "I caught it on camera, a demon, it really was, so I figured that's what got him." Unfortunately, I couldn't really find much more information on this other than the original report, so we may never know just what Pamela actually saw that day. Number 6. Tommy Smith. In February of 2015, a young man named Tommy Smith saw a car that he wanted, and he wanted it bad. Instead of, say, saving up money and purchasing it, he instead decided to steal the keys from the 65-year-old man driving the car. But when the man wouldn't give in, Smith got angry, attacking him with a weapon so aggressively that he even managed to snap it in half. Fortunately, the elderly man was able to survive but suffered serious physical and mental damage as a result. When Smith went on trial for the attack, he said that he had started suffering from hallucinations a few weeks before the crime took place and had actually been possessed by a demon at the time of the attack. Similar to Arnie Johnson, the court didn't want to hear it and noted the young man's history of schizophrenia. He ended up being charged but didn't go to jail, instead being sent to a mental hospital until they saw fit for him to be released. Number 5. David Berkowitz. Throughout the 1970s, a man named David Berkowitz terrorized New York City. After already becoming a serial arsonist, he apparently started to hear the voices of demons in his head telling him to commit crimes. When he moved to a new home, he started to believe that his neighbors and their dogs were possessed by demons. And when he moved to a new apartment in the same area, his neighbor was a retiree named Sam, who he believed was a powerful demon. Sam's dog named Harvey was also apparently a demon, and Berkowitz believed that the dog was telling him to kill. His neighbor's name of Sam is also how he got his later name, which was Son of Sam. Soon after, people were turning up dead and police were trying to figure out who it was. During a break from the crimes, Berkowitz wrote a note to the New York Post that said, "I am still here like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty, hungry, seldom stopping to rest." He was eventually caught for the crimes and received a whopping 365 years in prison, where he apparently became a born-again Christian. Number 4. Nikolai Golubyak. Of course, things like this don't just happen in America, so let's head over to Russia in August of 2008. In a forest outside of a Russian town, 4 bodies were discovered, all seemingly having gone through something pretty terrible. It turned out that the crime had been committed by 6 self-proclaimed Satanists, the group being led by a man named Nikolai. They believed that human sacrifices were required to please Lucifer, or the devil, and the crime had been a part of an initiation ritual. The bodies had been discovered only 250 meters from Nikolai's own home, and one of the bodies had a sheet of paper that contained 101 rules of the Satanists. The young man received 20 years in prison, while the rest of the members of the group received various different charges ranging from 8 to 10 years. This isn't the first time that a crime has been committed for the sake of a ritual or cult, and it certainly won't be the last. Number 3. Cody Lott. Over the years, men have been known to do crazy things over unrequited love, and this story is especially tragic. 2 young women were walking down a footpath in September of 2016 when they were approached by a man in a car. That man was named Cody Lott. He then attacked both the girls with a weapon, only one of them surviving the event. At his trial that took place 2 years later in 2018, Lott claimed that he had actually spoken with the devil, and that the devil had even helped him to plan the attack, saying it was due to one of the girls having a boyfriend and his own frustration over not having been able to find a romantic partner. Due to these claims, he was found mentally unfit to stand trial and sent to the maximum security unit of a Texas mental hospital. After he was released and was able to stand trial, he was sentenced to life in prison. Oddly, his parents then sued the state of Wichita to get the weapon used in the crime back, saying it had been stolen from their apartment, so I guess it was pretty important to them. Number 2. Louis Zambrano. On September 10th, 2015, in Queens, New York, a body was discovered. It was the body of Angie Escobar, who had apparently died after being attacked with a pair of scissors, reportedly having been there for about 4 days before she was found. Police were quick to find a suspect, arresting the woman's short-term boyfriend, Louis Zambrano, who had attempted to run away to Virginia. When put on trial, he claimed that he had 2 reasons for the attack. 1, demonic possession, and number 2, trust issues. One of these things is not like the other. Everyone who heard his declaration was disgusted, both the victim's family and the judge calling him out on his ridiculous claim, believing he was clearly using it as a poor excuse. He was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison, also receiving an extra 3 years for an unrelated burglary charge. And I wonder if that one was the devil's fault too. Number 1. Michael Taylor. A lot of people think that exorcisms are a thing of the past, but they're most definitely not. The Archdiocese of Indianapolis reportedly receiving around 1,700 exorcism requests in the year of 2018 alone. Back in 1974, an exorcism took place in England, the possessed man being Michael Taylor. He had joined a church and allegedly started having an affair with the congregation leader, Marie Robinson. During the time they spent together, Taylor went from a seemingly happy man to a more angry and irritable one, until eventually the two were caught naked together and Taylor blamed it on an evil presence or demon that was within him. A
vicar was called in to perform an exorcism on him, and in October of that year, they reportedly expelled a whopping 40 demons from his body. Despite them believing that there were still 3 evil demons inside him, they let him go on his way. And only a few years later, he was found covered in blood, and he said it was the blood of Satan himself. Well, it was actually the blood of his wife, him having taken her life. Taylor was put on trial but was found not guilty due to reason of insanity.